And so now where is he? Well, you might as well go to Canada. It's kind of a ratty little backwoods country anyways. And you don't really want to bother with niceties like actually having a seat and meeting Canadians and being elected. You can just hop in because you have this stellar resume and you're the Bank of England former governor and you can tell people what's what. And you can tell Canadians that you're an outsider and that there's going to be some sort of economic revolution. And you can do that while lying about your actual goals, which are net zero, or failing to explain how you made such a cataclysmic mistake. And you're going to do that because you are a complete bloody failure on the international front. And that's embarrassing. And it's going to become stark, bloody obvious in the next 5 years.
No, I know when we talked a couple of weeks ago, I expressed my concern about what was happening in Canada.
Doesn't look good.
Well, I read Carney's book, Values. I read it twice, and I understood it. And Carney says in that book, well, he says he's an advocate of centralized planning, ESG. He was a huge ESG advocate. He organized many large corporations to go down this central planning governance. I think our leader, Trudeau, I don't think I've ever heard him say a true word.
That is the full cycle of what conservatism is about. And I don't know why we don't talk about all of that, because that to me is a full vision.
You know, part of what's tearing our culture apart at the moment are battles about identity. I'm whatever I say I am. What I say I am is whatever I feel I am, moment to moment. It's intrinsic to me. And that's a really pathological, narcissistic and egocentric viewpoint, and it's doomed to failure.
They think they're duping everybody. They're not fooling more than half of Canadians. What are you going to do?
Right. Okay. So now let me ask you, if you don't mind, I'm curious, I guess on the personal side, how do you manage your relations with the people who are in power in Ottawa? I mean, you guys are so much in opposition with regards to everything I can possibly think of. Like, it's a very strange situation for a country to be in, because particularly Alberta, because Alberta is at the center of this, but it seems to me that it's the West in its entirety, insofar as it's got its head clear. I mean, I know British Columbia tends to be a very odd place politically, but the three prairie provinces, everything the federal government does is antithetical to their economic future. And so how do you manage that professionally and personally, given that, well, as you said, we have a situation where our prime minister is the enemy of our economic engine, fundamentally, and really fundamentally. It's perhaps, I suspect that he believes that his legacy, and you alluded to this, his legacy is something like planetary savior of the environment with Canada as the shining example, right? It's something like that. And I don't know, maybe he has an eye to some UN sinecure after he destroys the Liberal government and brings his party to its knees. And so he's playing an internationalist game, and he obviously seems much more interested in that. So, I don't understand exactly how you manage this practically.
It is, I find an intermediary, and my intermediary right now is Francois-Philippe Champagne, who actually really is a great booster of all things Canada. He does care about investment. He does care about job creation, and he's been able to find ways to support projects that have taken place in our province just as enthusiastically as he supports projects in Quebec and Ontario.
Speaker, we will take no lessons from these conservatives, Mr. Speaker.
Why have Canadians turned to Carney apart from Trump? Well, Carney has a remarkable resume. And if the choice is Carney or Pierre Poilievre, it would be easy for Canadians to assume that Carney has everything that Poilievre does and more. Poilievre's a career politician, and that means he's faced the electorate. It means he's done a lot of door-to-door knocking. It means he's listened to Canadians at the ground level and been appraised of their concerns, and Carney doesn't have that. But Poilievre is also a career politician. Now, Carney is a career bureaucrat, and he has a resume that on the face of it, you might be regarded as preferable in its depth to Poilievre's. So I want to familiarize you with his resume, and then I want to walk you through what it signifies, because we should assess not only what he's done and what he looks like on paper, but what that actually means practically and conceptually speaking, and with regards to its impact on Canada and the broader world. So we're going to start by walking through his resume.
Let's put Canada on the psychiatrist's table. Let's diagnose Canadian society. Is it delusional?
Blind, manipulated, led by, I think, our leader, Trudeau. I don't think I've ever heard him say a true word. You know, and I'm not trying to be overly dramatic in that regard. I've met people in my clinical practice and otherwise who were temperamentally incapable of any gesture or any word that was actually genuine. And that's a consequence of long practice. I think he's at least narcissistic, at minimum. And I think he's enabled by the useful idiots of the liberal left. And I actually think that's a very widespread problem and probably more typical of Canada now than any other developed country.
I think it is extraordinary that Mark Carney has become the Prime Minister of Canada. He did a terrible job in Britain.
But why would we do that? What possible motive, if we cared, which we don't, why in the world would we possibly want to destabilize Canada's democracy? And the answer to that is, well, I always felt, as a representative of Canada in that situation, I always felt like I was in some sense out of my mind because I couldn't believe that I could present that complex of ideas as a reality and that there wasn't just something wrong with the way I was looking at the whole situation. It's so utterly preposterous. So, well, back to Mr. Singh. He didn't support the truckers at all.
No, and the NDP has abandoned the working class. They become another party of the elite institutional aristocracy. That they represent those with big salaries doing managerial work, many of whom have been able to work from home with fully protected salaries and incomes for the last 2 years.
Oh, yeah. So there's this dynamic, and it's an interesting dynamic because it maps onto the political domain almost perfectly. So conservatives are conscientious and liberals are open, and open people are creative and entrepreneurial. They invite, and conscientious people, they draw the lines, they draw the borders, you know. Now, the problem for the conservative types who are conscientious is that it's much easier to appeal to young people with a vision. And conservatives are very bad at propagating a vision to young people. And so that void is being filled by the environmentalists on the leftist side because they offer young people an easy pathway to moral virtue and to sort of planetary messianism, right? It's like ally yourself with the marginal, celebrate the environment, and your work is done, right? And which is it's a really appalling thing to teach young people because their work hasn't even begun. But it is an easy out. Whereas the conservatives are always saying, no, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. And that is the voice of conscience. But, you know, you touched on the possibility for the conservatives to offer something that's much more in keeping with the vision. And at minimum, that's the pleasures and responsibilities of the typical upward striving, say, middle-class life that's characterized the American dream. It's like, that's not so bad. Graduate, find something useful to do, become an apprentice, let's say, so that you can actually make some money, find yourself a long-term, stable, monogamous partner, have some children, right? At minimum, you've got a life going there, the basics of a life. And if you can add some additional adventure on top of that, so much the better.
I did apologize to the president. President was offended by the act.
All those Canadians who have to remortgage, which I believe is about 60% of them, are going to do that and lose their houses. And it's going to be like really a rough go for him. And then the Liberals will replace him. So now, you know, that's a pessimistic view. And I'm not saying that will happen, but man, it isn't obvious to me that I'd like to be in his shoes. So like, how are you conceptualizing, let's say, the next 5 years in Canada?
I'd make a point that, and you've touched on it, and you've hit it. I talked to a young analyst who was looking and tracking at Justin Trudeau's declining popularity. And he also was tracking the number of mortgage renewals that are happening each month, and it tracks perfectly. The more people who are having to renew their mortgage and now face the sticker shock of having double the mortgage payment because of their high rates, that then they look around and say, who's caused this? And the obvious answer is the guys who've been in charge for the last 9 years. Who's got a solution for it? And the obvious answer is Pierre. And so that's very linked to what it is that they're experiencing, and it's happening in real time and happening very quickly, and it will probably accelerate.
The illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia has changed everything for Europe and for their energy security. And they are needing, in the very short term, to replace massive amounts of Russian oil and gas that their economies, their citizens rely on. Canada has taken steps to help. We have moved forward in increasing the supply and the output of oil and gas in this country. But if we're being entirely honest, there's not a whole lot we can do in the very short term to help with this coming winter's challenges. We can put more oil and natural gas into the global supply, which has a cascading impact that helps.
One of the major issues, obviously, across the Western world that governments have tried to fight is climate change. And
climate change.
And different governments are using...
The progressive get-out-of-jail-free card.
Well, in the UK, we've got this thing called net zero.
Yes, I'm well aware of net zero.
Presume you have the same thing.
Net zero means zero for the peasants. That's what it means.
What's going on in Canada?
Well, here's a cardinal example. I mean, first of all, we have a province in Canada, Alberta, which has the third largest fossil fuel reserves in the world, and we're very good at utilizing them, let's say. They're rather dirty in some ways on the environmental front, but that's life, you might say. And our country, and certainly that province, could be rich at the level of Norway with any degree of reasonable management whatsoever, and I think that's true for the whole country. Quebec itself has enough natural gas to provision itself for 200 years, and they won't touch it for reasons that are so diluted that it defies comprehension. The Chancellor of Germany, who was a socialist, and that's relevant given that hypothetically he's in Trudeau's camp, came to Canada less than a year ago, cap in hand, because the Germans were desperate because they've been following idiot green policies for far too long. And Trudeau said, well, we can't make a business case for shipping you liquid natural gas. Well, and the reason for that is he made it impossible for anybody to make a business case to do that, even though the Germans were prepared to offer tens of billions of dollars to us on unbelievably favorable terms that were very long-term in scope. And so we turned away one of our greatest allies in the West, left them in the hands of the bloody Russians and the Qataris so that our idiot prime minister could virtue signal pointlessly about destroying the fossil fuel industry in a manner that will make Canada poor and help the world not one bit. Right, and then the Prime Minister of Japan came and asked for the same thing and got exactly the same treatment.
So even if you believe that Carney had been properly successful in organizing these big financial institutions to hit the net zero targets, you're faced with the problem that they don't think so anymore, and that whole coalition is falling apart. So my interpretation of part of the reason that Carney's motivated to become prime minister is because his international career has collapsed in failure. And so now where is he? Well, you might as well go to Canada. It's kind of a ratty little backwoods country anyways, and you don't really want to bother with niceties like actually having a seat and meeting Canadians and being elected. You can just hop in because you have this stellar resume and you're the Bank of England former governor, and you can tell people what's what. And you can tell Canadians that you're an outsider and that there's going to be some sort of economic revolution. And you can do that while lying about your actual goals, which are net zero, or failing to explain how you made such a cataclysmic mistake. And you're going to do that because you are a complete bloody failure on the international front. And that's embarrassing. And it's going to become stark, bloody obvious in the next 5 years.